Welcome to the Influence Industry interview series brought to you by Tactical Tech. We interview experts to understand the technologies, the companies, and the personalities behind political campaigns across the world. If you want to find out more, check out influenceindustry.org.
Neema, thank you so much for joining. Tell us a little bit about Tanzania, your role in parliament there, how parliament is structured, whether you represent a particular region.
Thank you very much. My name is Neema Lugangira. I'm from Tanzania. And Tanzania is in East Africa, one of the most peaceful countries. We have the best national parks. You can see all kinds of animals here. The highest peak in Africa, Mount Kilimanjaro, best beaches, and the Zanzibar Islands. And the best part of it all is we have a female president, Her Excellency President Samia Suluhu Hassan, who is doing incredible work. And to top it up, as a parliamentarian, we have a female speaker as well, Honorable Dr. Tulia Ackson. So these are very exciting times in Tanzania. So in terms of my constituency, I'm a special seat member of parliament through the ruling party CCM, and my seat is a national seat whereby I represent non-governmental organizations, NGOs in parliament. This is a system that our ruling party CCM has in terms of distributing its special seats to have representatives for regions, but also national groups. So we have representatives for people with disability, representative for higher education, for labor/workforce, and non-government organizations, NGOs.
Very interesting how it's structured and that you occupy a special seat in parliament representing NGOs. And I would love to talk about your background, which, as I understand it, is in evidence-based policy and in advocacy. Prior to serving in parliament, you founded two NGOs, one committed to ending malnutrition in Tanzania and another to accelerate digital inclusion in the outskirts of the country. Why were these issues of particular importance to you?
That's a very good question. So in Tanzania, I come from a region called Kagera, and we border Rwanda, Burundi, and Uganda. And it's about from Dar es Salaam, the commercial city. It's almost 2 days on the road. And the air ticket costs sometimes, I remember a few years back, it used to cost the same as going to Joburg.
Wow.
Because of the distance. So prior to starting this NGO, I was working in an NGO that was focused on agriculture investments. It was quite shocking for me to find out that the regions that are food baskets, meaning that they produce the most food, these are the regions in the southern highlands of Tanzania, but have the highest level of malnutrition. So I thought to myself, what? How can that be possible? So then it triggered me, okay, let me look at my own region of Kagera. Because Kagera region is one of those regions where somewhat considered as a learned community. And I was absolutely shocked when I found out that when we look at the actual number of stunted children under 5, Kagera had the highest number of stunted children under 5. So when you look at the percentages, it's the regions in the southern highlands. But when you look at the actual number, it shifted and Kagera became the region with the highest actual number of stunted children. And as a person who's driven by policy, like, wait a minute, something has to be done here. Nutrition was being driven from a reactive point of view, meaning that someone is already stunted, so we're trying to fix it. But can we be proactive and prevent this? So if we want to be proactive and prevent this, it means we need to do a lot of mass nutrition education that will lead to social behavioral change. And so I set up the NGO. It's called Agri Thamani Foundation. Now, coming to the second NGO, it's called Omuka Hub. And Omuka was born from Agri Thamani because we had gotten a very small funding to do data mapping. We wanted to do data mapping on looking at one of the districts in Kagera and trying to look at which schools are offering school meals. So we wanted to use the OpenStreetMap, the data mapping to sort of map that up and to see how can we use open data for advocacy. And the funding was really tiny. It was really small. But we tried to do our budget and we were like, okay, we're good to go. And we said for sustainability, we're going to work with local government officials and things like that. So we're ready on our first day of onboarding. People have their phones. We're trying to get them to download the OSM apps. Whoa, then we get a huge shock. Digital literacy level was below par. Like those with smartphones did not know how to use them.
And can I ask Neema just briefly, these OSM apps you're talking about, what are they?
Just these apps which you can use to do open data mapping. So you can imagine something which for you and me would be so simple. You should be able to go and download an app. Once you've downloaded an app, you should be able to set up your account, should be able to go out and use it. Then we're like, okay, when they're in the field looking for the data, who's paying for the data bundle? So these kind of dynamics on the ground triggered, like, okay, let me look at Tanzania. There is always a lot of talk of digital development. Where is
Yeah.
that? I came to see that there's a huge gap. A lot of focus is in urban areas and not peripheral rural areas. I see the huge potential of people there. Like Kagera, for example, it was the third largest populated region as per the previous census. That's a huge market. We're bordering 3 countries. That's an access to market right there if we can use digital tools. So that's how Omuka Hub came into place. And we're focusing on accelerating digital inclusion in peripheral regions. How to make sure that we're not left behind.
What I find so interesting about both of these NGOs that you're talking about is that it seems like through your work, especially given the fact that Omuka Hub came from Agri Thumani, that you view these as interconnected causes. The need for digital literacy and inclusion would assist with the effort to end malnutrition.
You got it exactly right. So that's what we're trying to do. Of course, it's still in the beginning. Our focus right now is even the little funding that we get to ensure that we create an impact from it. Just on Sunday, we finished a week-long girls coding camp here in Tanzania, and we had 100 girls. It's under the Connected African Girls Program. I was fortunate I met UNECA, the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa, and I started, trying to pitch and say, please, can you come to Tanzania? Can we do something just as a pilot? And thankfully, we were able to get that opportunity where the girls learned different kinds of robotic animation and all of those things. And it was incredible. We had 100 girls. We were inclusive. So 15% were girls with visual impairment. We had girls who were deaf. The girls had an innovation fair of the things that they had innovated and came up with from the training. And our honorable minister responsible for ICT was so gobsmacked and shocked to see what the girls have been able to deliver in just a week, but to also see what the girls with visual impairment were able to do in just a week. So it was so humbling and exciting to see that because of us, UNECA is now going to change some of its strategies to make sure from now on, coding camps must be inclusive.
What interested you in bridging not just this digital divide, but here specifically the digital gender gap? How does this challenge present itself in Tanzania?
There's already a gender gap in development. I can probably zoom into the issue of making sure the environment, the online environment, is enabling for women to take part in. I'll give you 2 examples. First one is yourself as a man. You can have an online business selling lingerie and probably you'll get claps and cheers. But if I'm selling lingerie and post online, I'm probably going to be faced with sexist related abuse and comments, which will then make me to step back. That
Right.
stepping back is the digital divide. On the other point, majority of women, they conduct their businesses in the informal sector. But digital skills and literacy is usually more focused for the formal sector. So those
Right.
are the kind of things that we need to consider. But now the third one, which is more relevant to myself, is to bridge the digital gender gap. You need more female leaders online. But right now, the online environment for women leaders, women in politics, it's horrific. What happens is, people don't know how to critique on the issue. So when they don't have an agenda, they shift from the agenda to the gender. You could be a male member of parliament. You've posted you're in a certain meeting and maybe you made a certain contribution. If you get nasty comments, they will be about what you said. Whereas I, as a female parliamentarian, I will make similar post to yours, but my comments and my critique will be sexualized. It will be totally not related to the issue, not related to the agenda, but it has now transformed into the gender. And this is a weapon that a few are using to kind of shut us up as women leaders. I am of the opinion that you should not use your freedom of speech, your freedom of expression to make me not to be able to use my freedom of speech and my freedom of expression. This is a problem across the board with women in politics. In Tanzania, we have 143 female members of parliament. Those that are active online, what they would do is post but not engage because of the abuse. I'm particularly grateful to the African Union. In early August, they made a resolution to declare digital violence on women as an issue.
Put it on the agenda. That's
Even
great.
if we invest and put efforts on digital literacy, digital skills, and all of those things, if we don't improve the online environment, we're still going to hit that block. Because people are going to be skilled, but they're going to be scared to come online. Then if they cannot come online, then what?
You're very active on social media, which is clearly, or perhaps I'm assuming here, a little bit useful for you, but also a very fraught place for women, for people in the public eye.
There are times you get mob trolled, mob attacked, just because a certain group cannot deal and handle the issue you've raised. And they don't want to critique using the issue. So, to try and dilute the severity of the issue you've raised, they bring in these sexualized comments like, you just got there by removing your skirt. For a female leader, that's not a small thing. It has a huge ripple effect. And that's why you find women, they say, you know what, I don't want to put myself through it, and rightly so. But the few of us have to stick at it, try and stand up so that we can make sure, can create an environment where women leaders can feel safe to be online. As it is in leadership, the representation of women is lower. So we need to attract more women to come into leadership. So imagine a young girl aspiring to be a leader, and they see Neema is a member of parliament, but look at how she's being thrashed, and there's nothing she can do. Do you think that girl would want to get into politics? Do you think that girl would want to be a leader?
I want to talk a little bit about this challenge of the internet being used as a political tool of sorts. It was reported quite widely that in the weeks ahead of the most recent federal elections in Tanzania in October 2020, the Tanzanian Communications Regulatory Authority cracked down on media across the country. For example, TV and radio stations were suspended, social media, Twitter, WhatsApp, Facebook, Instagram were blocked, bulk SMS and voice messages were blocked, text messages containing Tundu or Lissu, the first and last names of the opposition presidential candidate, were also blocked. So it seems like the challenge here is not just the hate speech, the trolling, the vitriol online, but also the way in which access to the internet is being selectively turned on and off at politically convenient times. What do you make of the risks and the opportunities presented to you as a voter yourself, as a parliamentarian, as a woman, taking a step back from all of these interconnected dynamics? What do you make of the risks and opportunities presented to you, and what are the changes you'd like to see?
First of all, what I would like to say there is oftentimes not everything that is communicated to, let's say, the global world is as it is on the ground. Communication, it can also be framed and structured depending upon what you envisage the receiving part wants to hear. So not every time is said is the reality, because some of the things that you mentioned were actually not proven beyond reasonable doubt that was the case. I'm not able to comment on those for that particular reason. But what I can say is our president, Her Excellency President Samia Suluhu Hassan, she has proven, first of all, to walk her talk in the sense as being a highly democratic driven leader of our country, and making sure that the civic space is able to do what the civic space does, and giving press the opportunity to do their work, etc., etc. So we're very fortunate in the sense that we have, if it's political will, we have a strong political will in terms of making sure that there is access to information and freedom of expression in that sense. And I'm sure even if you are to do your own research to that effect, you will find that it is indeed the case right now here in Tanzania. Now, when it comes to what do I feel should change, first of all, I can talk about the opportunities. As a politician, you cannot avoid social media. Social media enables myself to not only reach the people who voted for me, but to reach more people, like across the country.
Yes.
Just at a flick of a finger.
And the world.
When you now go to social media, it's through the world. And if social media is used right, the opportunities are enormous. Look at what we're doing right now. Would we be able to do this without these platforms? Probably not. So the opportunity is enormous. But the question is, how are we using social media? And I think you would agree with me that the digital sector is one of the few, if not the only sector, that has developed over the years without being properly governed by policy and regulation.
Yes.
This is why you find in the last decade or so, from the developed world to the developing world, governments are now rushing to say, hang on, we need to govern this sector. Because it is a sector which has developed for so many years without being governed. Obviously, when any government tries to introduce any form of governing, there will be a reaction. Yes. And most likely will not be a positive reaction because we're already used of working in a certain way. But if you look at the enormity of digital development, the opportunities and the risks of what can be done in terms of manipulation, the sector has to be governed. Now comes the most important part. Because the sector has been developing on its own, it means that it has been developing in a silo, totally not engaging those who are at the forefront of creating that legislative platform, the parliamentarians. So now, as we are rushing to create the policies, legislation, regulations to govern this sector, what happens is I, as a parliamentarian, will be creating a law, a policy, a regulation, whilst I have not had the opportunity to be engaged by the sector. Because on the other hand, the tech sector feels that, you know what, this is tech, it's so complicated. These politicians are not going to get it. So they push us on the side, but they don't realize that it is these politicians who you say they're not going to get it, who are going to create the policies that will govern you.
Right.
Who will create the laws that will govern you. So we must find a way to bridge this gap and bring these two groups together so that we can result into what I said earlier, that enabling environment for this sector to thrive. And this is what triggered me to initiate setting up the African Parliamentary Network on Internet Governance, to ensure that as African parliamentarians, we should have a say in how digital development is taking place on our continent. When we're creating the law, we should be part of it from the beginning.
Thinking about the work of some academic political scientists, particularly in the US, who have been describing a challenge with respect to governance, but one that manifests itself differently in other regions. And in these cases, it was studied that many of the major tech platforms had made their products and services available to political candidates. The logic here was that they can build a relationship with one another, provide services to them to help them get elected. Then what happens is that after their candidate gets elected, these tech companies who help them land a seat in office are then advising these now elected officials about whether or not to regulate the industry. And that's a bit of a conflict of interest in a sense. They help them get elected. Now they're telling them, we helped you elected. You should hold off on regulating the sector. What you're saying here is a bit different, which is that it seems like there's a lack of exchange at all to begin with, which is a different kind of problem.
The same way that the tech sector is providing capacity building to different stakeholder groups like CSOs, NGOs, capacity building should also be placed to policymakers so that policymakers can make an informed decision on their own. Because right now, with the level of abuse that I'm getting, for example, the level of abuse that I'm seeing other women are getting, the impact, the negative impact that I'm seeing that it is having on limiting other women in politics to showcase their work and communicate with a wider audience, my immediate thought would be I need to find the most stringent law to sort this mess out. That will be the most natural thing, right? But if I'm well informed about the different best practices, about the different options that we can take, the different ways in which we can curb this online abuse, this digital violence, and create that enabling environment for women leaders online, then you may very well find me going for this second option because it's the most sustainable option. And this is why, I push for setting up the African Parliamentary Network on Internet Governance, APNIG, which was launched at the African Internet Governance Forum in Malawi. Inaugural members were 30 members of parliament from about 20 African countries. And I got the challenge and honor to be the founding chair. And the deputy chair is a member of parliament from Gambia, Honorable Alhaji Mbo. And the secretary is a member of parliament from Ghana, Honorable Sam George.
Founding chair of the African Parliamentary Network on Internet Governance. As you said, 35 MPs from over 20 countries across the continent. It seems like a tremendous opportunity. And on the topic of governance, what are the goals for this group and what do you hope comes from it? What are the kinds of capacity building that would be of most value?
Yeah, so we put together a communique, and basically, in terms of capacity building, we feel that as the African Parliamentary Network on Internet Governance, the following areas are the areas that we've prioritized that we need capacity building first. It's digital and geopolitics, digital economy, legislation for an open and unfragmented internet, Africa Union Digital Transformation Strategy for Africa, and Africa Union Data Policy Framework, issues of data protection, digital rights, digital space legislation, issues of cybersecurity, cybercrimes, artificial intelligence, digital taxation and revenue sharing, and of course, as politicians, digital for democracy. So those are the areas that we have put together that we want to prioritize. But we also want to be able to create policy dialogue and exchange between ourselves as African parliamentarians and our counterparts, EU member of parliament, UK MPs, Belgium, Germany, France, US senators, etc. Because what we have learned is in the developed countries, their parliaments, they pass laws and they pass strategies, funding structures that naturally impact Africa.
Yes.
But our counterparts are making those decisions, not necessarily being informed by people on the ground. The best people on the ground to inform them is us, fellow parliamentarians. So we want to be able to create that synergy between ourselves so that we can learn from them, but they can also learn from us. And the other thing is to create policy dialogues between stakeholders because digital development is multi-sectoral and multi-stakeholder. For so long, it has been solely driven as tech. But I gave you an example earlier on, nutrition, agriculture. That's not purely tech. That's a different sector. How do you bring in that sector to tech? So to also create those policy dialogues that will be multi-sectoral and multi-stakeholder. That is the gap that we want to bridge. As parliamentarians, can we work together rather than in silos? Because a decision that is made by EU members of parliament in the EU parliament would naturally have an impact on how EU member states do their foreign policy and their foreign funding, which automatically would have an impact on Africa.
Listening to you just now reminded me a lot of the discussion that was moderated with Shoshana Zuboff at the Africa Law Tech Festival in Nairobi. She wrote Surveillance Capitalism. And during this discussion, she said that the African continent has the opportunity to learn from a lot of the mistakes that North America and Europe have made in internet policy and regulation, and that as more of the African continent comes online, there's a chance to learn from these mistakes and to do it better. We were talking earlier about hate speech and trolling and vitriol online. Clearly, there's room to do things better. What lessons do you want to not see repeated in Tanzania as more people start getting online?
I think one of the biggest lessons I can say, and this is, across the continent, across the African continent, is the issue of digital taxation and revenue sharing. That is a key area of interest because we've seen how EU countries, EU member states, EU countries have been struggling with this issue of digital taxation and revenue sharing. And we feel that they can be a good learning for us there because, as you know, Africa is a huge market. We're huge markets. So, how can we make sure that revenue that is generated from our continents, we also benefit from that revenue? Ways of benefiting is either through taxation or through revenue sharing. Now, for us to know which path to take and how to take it, that's where the capacity building comes into play. So I think definitely one of the biggest lessons, and this is a lesson which we need to move very quickly on, is because laws don't work backwards, they work forwards. So we need to catch up. But to catch up on that, we need to be sensitive to ensure that we're well informed what we're trying to do. The other issue alongside that is making sure we also must work with social media, multinational tech companies to make sure that in their designing, they accommodate issues that can lead to digital violence. For example, when I report an abuse on an online platform, that abuse is in Kiswahili, our national language. I try as much as possible to translate it into English. But maybe the person on the other side sees this, actually, this person has not broken any of our abuse laws. But you're looking at what the person said, and in the context of Kiswahili, you're like, this person has violated all kind of rules, written and unwritten. So there's those issues that we need to discuss. There needs to be that human consideration and having the right interpretation. For example, I can say, you know what, VB, you're total garbage, total rubbish. And in a Western perspective, that may not be such a huge insult. But if I say it in Kiswahili, that VB, wewe ni takataka, that's a huge insult. But if you do a direct translation, it means garbage. So we need to be mindful of the different cultures, languages, etc. So I think that's another angle which still some work that needs to be done. Finally, I think an area that we can learn is the link between digital artificial intelligence, politics, and democracy. That is an area that we also, I think we can learn from the global South, to try and see how can we leapfrog on what they did well and avoid what they did not do well, because we're not there yet. That's where we're getting into.
You started earlier in your career, at least, you were working and running these NGOs, working on digital inclusion and malnutrition. I'm curious to hear your thoughts about that transition, what lessons you've learned so far about tackling these issues through those respective means. What's it like working on these issues through an NGO versus as an official government representative? Each has its own respective strengths and inherent abilities.
Firstly, I wouldn't say I'm government representative because parliament is a different arm, so to speak.
Mm.
So, as a member of parliament, I'm very fortunate that in my career, I've had the opportunity whereby I worked as self-employed, starting up and running a business. And then I worked in an international investment company, private sector, that was in Tanzania in the oil and gas sector. And then I worked in government. And then I worked in an NGO, but that was in a public private partnership. So it was working hand in hand with the government, and then set up NGOs, and then now in parliament. So I have kind of interesting mix and background. And what I can honestly say is that being a member of parliament, you have a world of opportunities of making change. But it's about how can you structure that change such that you can be impactful. So the first thing that I decided, much as I will certainly, work on and touch on and advocate for issues across the board, issues that are relevant for the government because it's our political party, Chama cha Mapinduzi, which is in power right now, but also represent issues that cut across that are priorities for my party, CCM. But I also created my own personal priorities as a member of parliament. I have 5 personal priorities. So the first one is nutrition. Basically, it's food security and nutrition security. Digital development, second personal priority. Community health, third personal priority. Gender equality in politics, fourth personal priority. And the fifth one is NGO sector development. So what these 5 say: food security and nutrition, it includes climate change, digital development, community health, gender equality in politics. There's a lot of NGOs working across those 4. So NGO sector development becomes key. Digital development, community health, a way to improve community health. You can do a lot of improving and strengthening our community health system by using digital. So you can see all of these 5 issues are interconnected. So as I'm working through them, it doesn't feel that I'm working through them. It's just they're all gelled in together. I'm a few months short to being 2 years becoming a member of parliament, but I'm enjoying it. I'm seeing great opportunity, and I'm very grateful to our honorable speaker, Dr. Tulia Axon. She gives us female parliamentarians equal opportunity, equal status, equal platform to speak in parliament and advocate our issues. And the government of Tanzania, led by Her Excellency President Samia Suluhu Hassan.
If you enjoyed today's interview and you want to find out more about the influence industry, data-driven political campaigns, and anything else about Tactical Tech's work, check out influenceindustry.org.